Hello and welcome to Tank and AFV News. My name's Tom, and tonight we are not doing a book review. So I know almost everything I've done lately is book reviews. You'll be happy to know I did film a new episode for the Tanks of World War II series. For people who've been waiting, it's been like a year since I did one of those. It's filmed. I just have to edit it, which I mean that's the most time-consuming part, really. So hopefully I have that done in the next couple days. Tonight, I just wanted to do one of my little videos where I respond to somebody else's video. There was, on Friday night, I think it was, Bernard Cast, who does the military history visualized and the military history not visualized channels, did a new video on it's actually the not visualized channel. So it's a clip of him and Dr. Roman Topol, who is, he's done a few videos with, who is a German historian and researcher. And they have a video. This one sort of surprised me because it's not often that something comes along where I'm like, well, that's something I've never really heard before, you know. It's not, I'm trying to build myself up, but I spend a lot of time reading about tanks. You just sort of, there's only so many sort of controversies and topics before you kind of, not exhaust the topic, but you sort of see the same stuff over and over again in certain channels. So this one sort of surprised me because the topic was the Panther a medium or heavy Panzer? And every book I've ever read on the topic says it's a medium tank. And I mean, I got this many books just on the Panther itself in print and another 10 on my computer in digital format. So I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on what's been written about this tank in English, at least. And of course, these books, it's all secondhand, or, you know, it's all, you know, I'm not out there like Dr. Topol, who he actually spends time in looking in German archives. I don't do that. I'm here in Michigan, and I don't even read German. And German was my nemesis in college, if you really must know. Straight C pluses. His contention is that, you know, from what he can tell, the Germans called the Panther a heavy tank, but one that was issued to medium tank companies. And he admits it's a bit of hair splitting, and I've just never heard that before, and I obviously, like, he's doing more research in primary materials than I do, so I will take him at his word, but I'd be really interested to see what sort of materials, you know, if he's got a document, some German documents that say the Panther's a heavy tank. I want to see it because, you know, like I said, there's many books that are just like, yeah, it's a medium tank, albeit everybody's always sort of known that the Panther, as far as medium tanks of World War II go, it's a really heavy one. I mean, it's the same weight as everybody else's, what everybody else called a heavy tank. You know, 45 tons roughly. It's, you know, I think it's only a couple tons lighter than the Soviet IS tanks. I mean, it's definitely in the same category as the IS and the KVs. You know, it's about the same weight class as the US M26 Pershing, although the Pershing is like the Panther. Is it a heavy tank? Is it a medium? We can get into that a little bit. So I thought it would just sort of fun to talk about how sort of toward the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War, that distinction between heavy and light tanks starts to really break down and become kind of meaningless anyway. So in a way, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a semantic thing, whether or not the Panther was a heavy or a medium, because in a lot of ways, it was, while they certainly didn't call it such, it was, I think, the first vehicle that started to kind of resemble a main battle tank in some characteristics. And I'm not alone in this. And in fact, we'll go to a clip here from 2012's Operation Think Tank, which World of Tank guys put together, and you can see Stevens Logan, the noted tank expert, saying as much.
Would you consider the T-54 to be the first main battle tank? The Centurion fans might argue that.
Panther.
Panther. Okay.
Now, clearly people who would want to argue against the notion of the Panther as a main battle tank would point out quite correctly that if you've got a heavy tank in your inventory, which the Germans most certainly did, the Tiger, that's sort of like, well, if you've got a heavy tank, whatever's less heavy has to be your medium tank. And we see that as well after World War II ends. So that first generation of post-war tanks, mostly in the 1950s, the heavy tank, light tank division lingers. Although the irony is that nobody was excited about them. I mean, the West, so you had the British with Conqueror and the Americans with M103, mainly making those vehicles because the Soviets have their heavy tanks, the IS series. But then you read sort of, at least, some of the history of the IS series, and it's sort of the Soviets are kind of keeping those around because they're like, well, the West has heavy tanks still. But nobody's excited about the concept. Everybody's moving toward really something that resembles a main battle tank, even if they're not calling it that yet. And that's sort of the irony, is that that first generation of post-war medium tanks, which is the T-54, 55, and the U.S. M48, M47, M46 as well, and the British Centurion, although the Centurion didn't even start off as a medium, it started off technically as a heavy cruiser that sort of became the universal tank, even though the universal tank kind of was what turned into Conqueror. It gets all confusing, but essentially, when we sort of go backward and look at it, that first generation of post-war tanks, they've all sort of been relabeled main battle tanks. I mean, if you look in a book of, main battle tanks of the world, it'll have Centurion in there, it'll have T-55, it'll have M48s, because countries use them as such. A lot of these countries that get those, and that'd be the biggest vehicle they have. And, once it's got a 105 millimeter gun, it's got the firepower of a heavy tank by the standards of the 1960s or 70s. So, what's the point of heavy tanks at that point anyway? That's the whole point of the MBT. It is, you are getting the firepower and armor that was traditionally found in heavy tanks, but with the mobility of a medium, because engine technology has got to the point where you can move a 50, 60 ton vehicle at speeds comparable to what in World War II you could only get out of a light or a medium tank. And, the Panther's kind of the first tank to kind of really straddle that line, where it is, 45 tons. It is really close to a heavy tank in terms of weight and firepower and armor. Yet it's being issued as sort of the main tank of the armored division, the Panzer Division at that point. Intended to be. Obviously, they never produced enough to actually accomplish that. There's still plenty of Panzer IVs and whatever else they could use to fill up the Panzer regiments. But the Panzer really kind of, the Panther, and, they did such a great disservice to history by naming a tank a Panzer Panther, because if you don't say it carefully, it's really confusing. But yeah, the Panther really straddles that line of what would later sort of characterize the main battle tank. And that's not, and don't take that as endorsing the Panther. I'm not, it's a very interesting vehicle. People call it the best medium tank of World War II. I'm not sure I agree with that. There's a lot of issues with the Panther as well. Although it's also, the last few years on the internet become very fashionable, I think, to really kind of denigrate the tank, partly because it had such a high reputation. Back in the day, I would say, like, certainly when I was growing up, like when you look at games like Panzer Blitz, the old board game, and they're sort of touting it as the end-all be-all of tank design of the period. So, I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. It certainly has its attributes, but it had plenty of issues as well. But in terms of developing something that was kind of doing away with these really kind of outdated notion of light and medium and heavy tanks, that you sort of could divide them up by weight, that weight was the main characteristic. And it's like, no, that's really not, especially in the post-war world where technology is the point where you can move a large heavy vehicle at a decent amount of speed. So really the limiting factors are some of these sort of larger operational logistic issues, as far as what's limiting the weight of your vehicles, more so than, engine power. So anyway, the sort of long rambling thing here, but I just, like I said, I was sort of surprised by that video. I would like to see more documentation proving Dr. Topol's point. But I really do enjoy the Military History Visualized channel and the videos that Bernard and his guests put out. And, I got to be a guest on that once too, which was a lot of fun. So anyhow, hopefully they'll do some follow-up maybe, because I'd be interested in seeing that. And stay tuned, because hopefully in a couple days here we'll have a new AFE News Tanks of World War II episode. This one's on the Sommois S-35 French tank, so it'll be second to last of the 1940 French tank videos. Then we move on to, hopefully at the end of next week, I'll start recording the episode for the Char B1 Bis, which one of my personal favorites. I got a weird fondness for any of the tanks with multiple guns like that, or the M3 Lee. I think are just, they're not good, but they're really interesting because they're just so darn weird. So hopefully we'll get back on track with those Tanks of World War II videos for you. So, all right, well, thank you, and we will catch you on the next one.